Well, it's a lovely sunny day again. Stay with us, a very interesting story. A lady dropping in to chat to us about her decision to move from Canada back to Ireland. Grace, good to see you.
Thanks, Sean.
We've actually spoken before.
We have. Nice to be back.
Yeah, but not about this.
No.
Because we were speaking to Seamus earlier on from Leeds, who's a Derry Donegal man who moved away in the 80s, and he was talking about, you know, the attitudes towards Muslims and attitudes towards the Irish and all his different experiences, and he's put it up on Facebook just to get a feel for how people are feeling at the moment, basically. And I mentioned you were coming on because I asked him where home was, and he said, well, home is both places. When I'm in Derry, I say I'm going home, and that's to Leeds, and when I'm in Leeds, I say I'm going home, and that's to Derry.
Yes.
Now, for you, this is home, but you've been living in Canada for how long now?
I've been 22 years in Canada and 10 years in London, so I've been 32 years out of the country.
So most of your adult life?
Yes, yeah.
Out of Ireland?
Yeah.
Yeah. And why did you leave Ireland?
Well, similar to a lot of people, it's education and work. I left first to go to Dublin, and then for education to get a degree, and then I went on to London and I worked there for 10 years as a social worker. And so, you know, 1 year, you go for 1 year and you end up going for 10.
And a lot of Irish went to London, so nothing
exactly.
new about that. Did you live around the Irish, in the Irish area, or not?
I didn't, and I had a lot of, you know, I went there with somebody with a degree, and my experience was different, of course, than if I was working in a building site. And I noticed a lot in London, at the time I was there, a lot of prejudice against Irish people. I felt very tense there.
Did you?
And so compared to being in Canada, where I feel much more relaxed. Now, it might be different now in England, but I felt very self-conscious to have an Irish accent. And if at that time there had been some bombs and you felt that you had IRA stamped on your forehead, you know, so it took quite a while to relax as an Irish person in England, and I wasn't expecting that.
So how old were you then?
I was in my late 20s.
Then this was in the 80s, was it? Or?
Yeah, that would have been, yeah.
Yeah, and you're in there when there are bombs going off, and I was asking Seamus the same question, and people were saying to him, oh, things about the Irish, but you're okay, kind of thing, you know. Yeah,
what I realised is it gave me a sympathy for people of colour in England, because although we weren't of colour, there were some parallels.
Well, that's his very point, actually.
Was it?
That's his very point.
I didn't hear his interview.
Yeah, well, that's his very point, that now people are getting it because they're Muslim, and he said, we got it because we were Irish, you know?
Yeah. I think what's changed, though, is that it's become more cool to be Irish, you know, with the Celtic Tiger and that. Things shifted, and it was more, there was some advantage in being seen as Irish.
Well, I've had the pleasure of being at the London Association, Donegal London Association, twice now, 2 years in a row, and I'm staggered by how much they love I lived in London for a while, but yeah. They absolutely, I mean, of course they love Ireland, but they love where they are. They've loved what they've done. Not everybody, but the people I encountered there, many of them, they love being there. They love living there. They love London, and it's so different to Donegal.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, they love it. And I'm sure if you were to ask them, they've all had experiences like yours.
Yeah.
But at the moment, anyway, it seems to be a good place to be Irish.
Yeah. But the other thing about it is that I think when you go, whatever time you go, you hold on to the Irishness that was what Irish meant at that time. And I used to find when I meet people who'd been there for years, who are, you know, in the Irish community in London, they seemed old-fashioned to me, because they were back in a time warp of what things were like when they first went over there. Then I'd come and I also was Irish, but I was a different kind of Irish person, you know. And so that's the thing, time doesn't stand still.
But you do find that, I'm sure you find it in Canada too, and particularly in America, Australian places like that, and in London, that where there are Irish people, they tend to hold on to the traditions of Irish dancing and Irish music, and in fact often they hold on to it a lot stronger than people do here.
Yes, they do. And I've realised in Canada, for example, I mean, I don't huddle with Irish people, but I have a number of good friends who are Irish, and we really enjoy getting together. But I have friends from other countries as well. But I really do value, I think the longer I've been out of Ireland, the more I've appreciated what's here. And it seems hokey when you come back, because people who live here, this is just their normal life. But when you've lived in other countries, you realise just how connected and how friendly people are here. So just to give an example, my mother turned 90 recently, and she was in hospital in Donegal when she turned 90. And on the day of her birthday, she woke up, they had balloons around her bed, and one of the staff made her a cake. You know, I mean, how good is that?
Do you think that wouldn't happen?
I doubt it would happen in Canada. I mean, it's not that people aren't friendly there, but there's a level of connection here that there isn't there.
It's very interesting to hear you say that. So you have noticed that you nearly have to go away to appreciate what you have.
Absolutely. I mean, when I left, I couldn't wait to get away, to be quite honest. And I never wanted to work in Donegal. I thought, get to Dublin, get far away. And now I so appreciate Donegal, and I don't want to live and work in Dublin. I want to live and, work in Donegal, where I'm known, and it just has a different feel. But a part of that, I've been thinking about it. Why is that? I mean, I don't think that Donegal has changed. I have changed, and I've become more enough of myself that I can come back in with more confidence.
So you think it's like saying, you're a child that you think you know it all, and then you go away, you grow up, and you realise actually I don't know it all. Is it a bit like that? Donegal, perhaps. We forget that, it's a culture, and you go away and you come back again and you realise, well, it's taken a long time building this up.
Yeah.
And we think we can change everything, or we think we need to change everything.
And I suppose it's not quite true for me to say it hasn't changed. Of course it has changed.
Yeah, of course.
And, Ireland in some ways, in the time I've been away, has grown up in a lot of ways. It's caught up with the rest of the world. Now, some people wouldn't agree that these are improvements, but since I left for Canada, divorce has come in here, so people have that choice. Gay marriage has come in, so people have that choice. So Ireland has changed, and yet there's something very elemental about it that hasn't. So when I'm in Canada trying to build community in my neck of the woods of Victoria, I live in Victoria, which is way over on the west coast of Canada.
Yeah.
It's a different thing trying to build community there. Here, you're steeped in community, and people don't want people to know their business because there's so much community around you, it's almost suffocating.
And what about the debate on gay marriage in Canada?
Well, you can get married in Ireland. In
Canada.
Canada.
How did they sort of interpret what was happening in Ireland? Was it well,
I think it was a surprise because Ireland, is traditionally seen as a very much a Catholic country, and people were surprised that the vote had got through with quite a wide margin. Yeah. So I think Ireland is kind of surprising itself in a way.
Why do you want to come home? Because you've been away for 30 years or so, you've been in Canada for most of that. A very different place.
Yeah.
Although I know there are similarities in some ways, I presume, and because a lot of Irish people go to Canada. So, there's something they get about it, and maybe there's something about, if you're in a rural area of Canada, maybe it's a bit like a rural area of Donegal, is it?
There will be some similarities, I suppose, in that way. I mean, the three reasons were, one is that I wanted to come home. Yeah. I'd been an emigrant for years. I'd been reading the Irish Times online, all that sort of stuff, and lonely for home. The second is my mother was turning 91, and it seemed like the right time to come home. And the third reason is I was able to come. I'm self-employed. I mean, I have a Canadian husband. I have a house over in Canada, but I could, up sticks and take my business with me to Donegal. So it wasn't I was leaving a job. So those are the three reasons why I came.
Have you children?
I don't have children. I was a foster parent for nearly a decade. So those children have grown up now, and I don't have my own children. Okay, because a lot of people will say to me, well, I would come home only, I can't leave now because my grandchildren are all of that. It's really difficult, it's not simple. I mean, I'm here. When I came last year for a trial. I came for 4 months, and I was surprised how happy I was here. I didn't want to go back to Canada. I was just happy as a clam. And I thought, why am I so happy? So that's, I went back to Canada, and then I thought, I'm really glad to be back in Canada also. So it wasn't a simple one or the other. But I was glad to go back to Canada for different reasons. The weather's better. So, I mean, nobody's going to argue with you about Donegal weather. The medical services, I can go to the doctor. I don't have to pay. My husband was over there, and I have friends and, a good life there. So there was all the familiarity. Well, see, medical, as you're getting older particularly, that becomes a huge issue for people. And we had a whole show yesterday on the hospital and on people complaining, and rightly so complaining about problems that they're facing, and, emergency protocol being put in place. And there are people who are genuinely concerned about health in Ireland, and will they get the access they need when they need it, Yeah. So in Canada, you wouldn't have that issue? Well, what it is in Canada is we pay a monthly rate, and it's gone up now. It's $75, not euros, a month. And for that, we pay that every month. Insurance. And then you can go to the doctor, you can go to the specialist. You don't pay for that. Now, you pay to go to the dentist, and you'd pay if you have a prescription. Is there a big queue, though? Well, it depends, I suppose. Touch wood, I'm healthy. I haven't had to queue up for surgeries. There would be some queues, and if you paid privately, you could skip the queue. But generally, the health service, compared to the States, the health service is great in Canada. So when Michael Moore, for example, he interviewed Canadians about their time off, but also the medical services, and it's great.
Yeah. Your husband has to now adapt to Ireland for a while.
He has.
You're coming back for a year or so, are you?
Coming for a year and a half.
Why a year and a half?
Well, it was we had to lease out our house, and you have to decide when you lease how long is it for. And we thought, well, if we do it for a year, we'll be coming back next February. Well, that's kind of the winter. And then will we go for a year and a quarter? Will we go for a year and a half? So we just we picked a year and a half. It was kind of just a number out of the air.
You've got a skill, so you're hoping to work here. What about your husband?
Well, he's already had a little bit of work here. He's a trainer on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder when women drink when they're pregnant and how the dangers of that.
He's a trainer.
He's like an educational trainer.
Yes.
And so he's trying to figure he's got a work visa. That was the other thing. It didn't take long at all. 3 weeks here and he had his work visa. So he was very welcomed here. He's amazed at the how people are connected here. He loves gardening, for example. So he's going to a community garden course every Thursday in Bundoran. He's already made a gardening friend. That friend has given him the use of 2 raised beds for the summer, so he can plant his own vegetables in Frosses. So, he's amazed at how connected people are here. But he's figured out as he goes. He has a pension as well, so he's got that.
It's interesting because sometimes people who've left Ireland and gone away and come back again, one of the things they don't like is the connection. They think they'd rather be a bit more disconnected, because if they've lived in London or they've lived in Manchester or they've lived in other places like that, people are much more disconnected. You won't necessarily know who your next door neighbour is, and then they come here and they feel, it's a bit too much.
Yeah, and I don't know, for some reason, maybe because I am a connector anyway, I've been trying to build community in Victoria, and then I come home here and it's like a fish getting back into the water, and I think this is what I'm trying to build, and it's so much harder there. It's so easy here. But I also understand when you're here, if you've never left, gossip, people sort of judging you, all that sort of stuff. I think having been away long enough, I don't care about that as much, and that gives you a freedom to sort of be yourself.
Grace Gary is with us in the studio, and she's moving back from Canada with her husband. She's been out of Ireland now for 30 years, lived in Canada for
22, and
in London for nearly 10.
Yeah.
And you decided to move back and give it a try, so you've rented your house out in Canada, and you and your husband have moved over, trying it for a year and a half, loving the experience. Loved the experience initially, which was for about, how long did you say?
I came last year for 4 months, so that was my first trial.
And loved it.
I did, I loved it.
Yeah. And I was asking you in the break about fostering.
Yeah.
And you fostered 2 children.
We fostered 2 children. I had never seen fostering as being on my life map, but I was asked one day, because I'd advocated for these 2 children, if we would foster them.
As a social worker.
As a social worker.
Yeah.
And they had been in a lot of homes, and 6 homes in 2 years.
Brother and sister.
Brother and sister. And so we took them in, and we made up our minds to do all we could to not let it break down, because they'd been in so many homes in such a short period of time. So of course that's formative. I don't have children of my own, but any parent can tell you their lives change dramatically once the kids arrive. So these were ready-mades. Instead of having babies, they were 5 and 7 when they arrived. And we had them. We had one of them for almost 10 years.
Big risk. When you're a couple and you have your own way and you're happy anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And then 2 children are planted in the middle of that aren't yours. It was a risky thing to do, wasn't it?
I think it was risky, and looking back on it, I mean, what it did, it drew us together, but it could have split us apart because it was very stressful. But we kind of worked well as a team, and so that was good.
But they had challenging
They had a lot of challenges. Their mother had drank a lot when she was pregnant, so they had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. They had trauma. They had, the reasons children come into care, they're usually very serious reasons, and they're very serious reasons when they stay in care. So those children had all those troubles.
So as their mother, their brother and sister had consumed a lot of alcohol while she was pregnant, they ended up with these problems.
Yes, there's usually learning problems, social problems. Excuse me. They'll always have difficulties in their lives.
And did they resent you initially?
They didn't trust us initially because when children have been moved around from Billy to Jack, they've no reason to trust you. So we spent a lot of time to be reliable in their lives. So my foster son, who was not, didn't give a lot of praise, he wasn't very flahool with the praise. 3 years later, he said, I know now what good parents are. He said, when I lived with my father, I thought I knew what good parenting was. And I think what he couldn't articulate it, but we had tried in all the small ways. If we said we'd do something, we did it. So he gradually relaxed.
Right.
You know, so we did our best, but you can't undo all that early stuff, you know, that happened to those children. We can make a difference, but we couldn't, you know.
And was there contact with the parents?
Yes, there was, and we always encouraged that. I mean, as a foster parent, it can make your life harder when the children see their parents because they're upset and their behaviour usually deteriorates after. But I always felt it was important for them to have their own attachment to their own parents and to respect that, even though their parents couldn't look after them.
And of course, Grace, the obvious question is, how do you let go then after 9 years with these children?
Yes, it's not easy. I mean, of course, you're emotionally attached to them and they to you and whatever. But it was a long road and a complicated ending. But what's great is that we're still in touch with, especially the girl, and I'm in Skype with her several times a week, and she sees us as very important in her life. And we brought her to Ireland some years ago, and, you know, she feels very connected to us.
Complicated ending.
Yes.
Difficulties,
a teenage, you know, a girl with a teenage body and a child mind. That's what fetal alcohol, often they're very immature. It was too, she found the structure too much. She wanted the freedom.
She wanted the freedom, and all of a sudden, see, it's your responsibility. You're looking after them, and wow, that is a big responsibility.
It is. And of course, once they're, you know, at the age of being sexually active, you know, all that brings, and a child that doesn't have the sense. I mean, a lot of teenagers don't have sense, but if you have a young brain because of a disability, it's even more complicated.
Did they both go together?
No, they didn't. They had so much trauma that they had to be separated after we had them 4 years, so that they could grow up away from each other. They needed to be separated because they were like an abusive couple.
So who did you keep then?
We kept the girl.
And
the boy, we kept in touch with the boy, but he moved to a family near us.
Right.
And so they were still in touch, but they needed space away from each other because they were recreating the abusive relationship that they had seen in their childhood.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure you get great joy from thinking that you did something good in their lives.
Yes, but it was also humbling because I think when I was a social worker and I maybe spend an hour a week with a child, I thought I understood parenting and children, but I think it's a whole other thing when they move into your home. It's like importing dysfunction into your home because the children come with all their troubles, and then whatever troubles you had yourself, the whole thing is a stew. You know, there's a lot to it.
And did you and David look at each other many a day and say, what have we done here?
Kind of, yes. I mean, it was great to be able to talk together. We really, each of us understood so much about, you know, in the evening, nobody could understand it like the two of us because we were in the thick of it.
Yes.
So we were a good support for each other, and we were good, we both came from stable families. I think that helped as well.
And did you miss them when they'd both gone?
At the beginning. Now I'm relieved that they're gone because I don't have that responsibility, because it was so, it was a heavy responsibility and it restricted our lives because we were always thinking, what's going on now? What do we need to do? What services have we to put in place? So I'm relieved of that responsibility. But I did a good job. We did a good job.
Well, I was going to ask you, if you know that, if you're not looking back and saying, you know something, we shouldn't have taken this on, it didn't work out, you're not looking at it like that.
No, I mean, I feel really good about it. We really did our best. We learned a lot from it. We made a difference.
That's the other thing. How much did you learn from that?
Oh, I learned a huge amount. I learned a lot about myself as well, and my own, you know, I had a good few therapeutic skills, but there's another thing to live with a child day in, day out, and you're up in the middle of the night and they've woken you up with a nightmare, and you've got a plethora of professionals coming into your life because the children had many, you know, they had therapists, they had orthodontists, they had the social worker, they had a psychologist. There were many people that came with the children, and so your home was like a fishbowl.
Okay, well, you've given up lovely summers and strawberries, very cold winters and no strawberries unless you're in the supermarket.
Yeah.
And so what are you giving up to come back to Ireland? What's the worst thing to leave behind, as in the thing you'd like to bring most?
The weather.
Okay. Even though it's freezing in the winter? No,
we're lucky, you see, where we are. If you go to the total west of Canada, I live on Vancouver Island, which is about the size of Ireland, but not as developed.
Okay.
And the weather on Vancouver Island, we don't get the big snows. We get nice, warm, dry summers.
So you'll miss that.
I will miss that. Although so far, I have to say, I wouldn't complain too much about the weather. I've been here since the end of February, and the weather hasn't been bad. It's been good, actually.
And can you stay here long term? As in, you know, because we had Americans who there's been a big issue about, who came from America, wanted to come and live here, and actually got booted out, even though, because they hadn't enough money to stay, basically. They expect you to have a certain amount of money and all of that.
Yeah.
Will you find living here more expensive than Canada?
Well, it's interesting. I actually find the food cheaper here than in Canada. When I go, say Lidl's or somewhere, if you buy a container of, say, one of those sauces for Indian food, say, it might be like 90 cents here, and it might be $4 in Canada. So now I do live in Victoria, where the food is more expensive. I also, good few things are cheaper here. Petrol's more expensive. Car insurance more expensive.
It sounds like it's a people thing. You've come back for the people.
It's the people, yeah. It's also the land, I think. There's something, I mean, that's what surprised me last year. I said it in my article, you know, a joy stole over me. I couldn't explain it.
This was in the Irish Times.
In the Irish Times, yeah. I just felt happy. And for so many years, I had wanted to come back, but thought I couldn't. And then I thought, well, I wonder, could I? And then I thought, okay, maybe I can. I started making a plan. And there was a huge amount of stress to pack up our lives in Canada. And that's the thing I find, one of the things I find challenging here is when you live here, you don't realise how much work it takes to come back. And the space that you left when you left is not the same space when you come back to, either because you've changed or the people that you're coming back to have changed. And so you're trying to settle in. Like, I'm here now 15 weeks. I'm still arriving. You know, I'm here in body, but my mind is still arriving. We still haven't, you know, I've joined the gym. I do my meditation every day. The kinds of things that I'm used to in Canada. But I still haven't found my way yet. I haven't found a place to live, for example. I'm living with my mother. So, you know, things that kind of help.
How is that?
Well, you know, when you live with an elderly relative, it's challenging for her sometimes. It's challenging for us. It's just the way it is. But it's also nice to be here. It's nice to be home, to be closer to my mother at this time of her life, rather than, you know, continents away.
Yes, true.
You know.
It's true. And you obviously made a lot of friends in Canada. Was it hard to say goodbye, or was it sort of...
It was, actually. And we had a number of goodbye parties, and people were sad to see us go, but, you know... You
tried to make a bit of Ireland in Canada, didn't you? But
I did, yeah.
It didn't succeed quite how you hoped?
No, it did succeed, but not in the way I hoped. And so, to give you an example, I live in a city, small city. And so, twice a year we invite our neighbours in. I know 100 of my neighbours by name. And they were very helpful to us when we left, helping us pack up the house. But people are more reserved there. And it's not the kind of, people, you could go to someone's house there and stand on the doorstep and talk with them, and they wouldn't ask you in. Now, that would never happen here. That's an example. Whereas I've become more bold as the years have gone by. And so I've said, can I come in? And then people say, oh, sure. But you wouldn't have to ask here. People think it was strange to ask to come in. So that's an example of how things are different.
Well, listen, we could talk all day, but we can't because the time has beaten us. And I wish you and David well. So does Moira Mills, by the way, who says best wishes to Grace and David. You've got a lot to offer Donegal, and you're the best.
Thank you. You know, one thing I forgot to say was about the Donegal diaspora.
Yeah.
I had Joanne Gilmartin reached out to me in Canada when she saw some of my articles, and they have been great at reaching out to not just Donegal people have a connection with Donegal in other countries, encouraging that richness back and connection back and forth.
Lovely to see you again.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll talk in a year's time.
Yes.
See how you're getting on.
Yes.
And hopefully you'll still be smiling. Thanks for joining us. Grace Gary, by the way.
Thanks, Sean.
That was really interesting. Slán agus Banach. Bye-bye.